Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, text number 10. Ata, now, me, my, Deva, O Lord, Samoham, delusion, Apakarshtum, to dispel, Tvam, you, Arhasi, be pleased, Ya, which, Avagraha, misconception, Aham, I, Mama, mine, Iti, thus, Iti, thus, Itasmin, in this, Yojitaha, engaged, Tvaya, by you. Translation: now be pleased, my Lord, to dispel my great delusion. Due to my feeling of false ego, I have been engaged by your Maya and have identified myself with the body and consequent bodily relations. Please repeat. Now be pleased, my Lord, to dispel my great delusion. Due to my feeling of false ego, I have been engaged by your Maya and have identified myself with the body and consequent bodily relations. Purport: the false ego of identifying one's body as one's self and of claiming things possessed in relationship with this body is called Maya. Thank you. Don't think I don't appreciate it. In Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, the Lord says, I'm sitting in everyone's heart, and for me come everyone's remembrance and forgetfulness. Devahuti has stated that false identification of the body with the self and attachment for possessions in relation to the body are also under the direction of the Lord. Are you amazed so far?
Yes.
By what?
By the fact that everything is under the control of the Lord, forgetfulness and remembrance.
Okay. You're amazed? You look amazed.
This is David Hutti speaking, right?
This is, well, probably the purport. This is Devahuti speaking in this verse, saying she's giving this prayer to the Lord. It's kind of a mea culpa. This is okay, I've had enough. She already expressed how she's frustrated with the material, with the senses, their objects. I'm tired of this. And now it's an open prayer declaring her surrender. So it's a very important verse. It's the definitive moment in the sojourn of the living entity in the material world when the living entity decides to use its free will to declare dependence on the Lord. Then everything changes after that. And one might say that the whole purpose of the material creation is for the living entity to come to this point. So it's momentous. It's a momentous verse to hear someone say this out loud with full sincerity and a conviction by well-reasoned faith. It's very powerful. So she had said, now be pleased, my Lord, to dispel my great delusion. Due to my feeling of false ego, I have been engaged by your Maya and have identified myself with the body and consequent bodily relations. So she's very aware of what's going on. Prabhupada writes, the false ego of identifying one's body as the self, as oneself, and of claiming things possessed in relationship with this body is called Maya. In Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter, the Lord says, I am sitting in everyone's heart, and for me come everyone's remembrance and forgetfulness. Devahuti has stated that false identification of the body with the self and attachment for possessions in relation to the body are also under the direction of the Lord. Does this mean that the Lord discriminates by engaging one in his devotional service and another in sense gratification? If that were true, it would be an incongruity on the part of the Supreme Lord, but that is not the actual fact. As soon as a living entity forgets his real constitutional position of eternal servitorship to the Lord and wants instead to enjoy himself by sense gratification, he is captured by Maya. This capture by Maya is the consciousness of false identification with the body and attachment for the possessions of the body. These are the activities of Maya. And since Maya is also an agent of the Lord, it is indirectly the action of the Lord. The Lord is merciful. If anyone wants to forget him and enjoy this material world, he gives him full facility. Not directly, but through the agency of his material potency. Therefore, since the material potency is the Lord's energy, indirectly it is the Lord who gives the facility to forget him. Devahuti therefore said, my engagement in sense gratification was all due to you. Now kindly get me free from this entanglement. By the grace of the Lord, one is allowed to enjoy this material world, but when one is disgusted with material enjoyment and is frustrated, and when one sincerely surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord, then the Lord is so kind that he frees one from entanglement. Krishna says, therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, first of all surrender, and then I will take charge of you and free you from all reactions of sinful activities. Sinful activities are those activities performed in forgetfulness of our relationship with the Lord. In this material world, activities for material enjoyment, which are considered to be pious, are also sinful. For example, one sometimes gives something in charity to a needy person with a view to getting back the money 4 times increased. Giving with the purpose of gaining something is called charity in the mode of passion. Everything done here is done in the modes of material nature, and therefore all activities but service to the Lord are sinful. Because of sinful activities, we become attracted by the illusion of material attachment, and we think, I am this body. I think of the body as myself and of bodily possessions as mine. Devahuti requested Lord Kapila to free her from that entanglement of false identification and false possession. Tata me deva sammoham apakarshtum tum arhasi yova graho ham mameti hetasmin yojitastvaya. Now be pleased, says Devahuti, my Lord, to dispel my great delusion. Due to my feeling of false ego, I have been engaged in your Maya and have identified myself with the body and consequent bodily relations. And this is the power of the Lord's external energy, that for a jiva it becomes compelling. And it seems like there's a good case for becoming entangled in the material world. When one looks at it, it's very convincing. And the Bhagavatam, therefore, warns us again and again, don't become entangled in something that you won't be able to follow up with. In fact, Krishna says this is the sign of a wise person. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga adukhay onaya evate adyantavanta konteya nate shuramate buddha. A person who's actually developed real intelligence that's not contaminated by the material nature, understands the difference between pleasure that has a beginning and an end and pleasure that goes on forever. You have to see those two categories in order to avoid the pitfall which is described here as avagraho. It's the way in which you get grabbed by the material nature and pulled in. The sages, of course, have discerned, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, that there's a difference between that which is permanent and that which is temporary. And the Sri Upanishad says, Anyadevahur sambhavad, anyadahura sambhavat, iti shushumatiranam yenas tadvichakshire. The result of your work dedicated to illusion and or dedicated to the Supreme Personality of Godhead through divine service will be very different. Please be aware of that. Not only that, there's a huge difference in the quality of knowledge that relates to the two. Anyarevahur vidyaya, anyarahur avidyaya, iti shushumatiranam yenas tadvichakshire. There's some knowledge which is called vidya and others called avidya. The avidya is also known as shilpa karma. Shilpa karma means artistic knowledge and knowing how to do things. Living entities are smart, they figure things out. Even beavers know how to build houses. And any living entity you look at can figure things out. Human beings have even more capacity, but they'll use it to develop artistic projects, cities, towns, big buildings. But ultimately, if there's no dedication to real knowledge, that is, an understanding the difference between the body and the self, then it's useless. That seems very severe, and it is. But without that kind of clear demarcation between what's real and what's not, the living entity harms himself. And again, it happens. Therefore, the Bhagavatam is very merciful in letting us know, as a stern parent, don't touch that. You're going to get burned. And unless we know how it is, we're pulled in again and again, and we're able to at least begin the process through which we can taste real knowledge and the atmosphere of the eternal, then it's a foregone conclusion that we'll remain ensconced in the material world forever. So this is the topic of the Srimad Bhagavatam again and again, that how is it we fall into illusion? Prabhupada commented on this verse. He quoted from Rishabhadeva, Pumsa Striya Maita Nibhava Mitam, Tayomrito Hriraya Grantamahu, Atogriya Kshitra Sutapta Vitera. Janasya Moho Yamaham Mameti. That there's an attraction between male and female in the material world. Of course, there's attraction between male and female in the spiritual world. That's the Adi Ras. Radha and Krishna. The difference is where the Ananda is. That there's a male, a Purusha, and there's Prakriti, the female, and this is what everybody is attracted to. This is where the Ananda comes from, this relationship. And that's pervertedly reflected into the material world in the form of unlimited soap operas that people sit and watch. And all the soap opera of the material world, which is the idea that's there in the spiritual world, only it gets reversed here in the material world. Jiva Goswami says then it causes you misery. That same potency, which is the pleasure potency in the spiritual world, causes you misery in the material world because you've got your wires crossed. And Pumsa Striya Maitini Bhavamitam, male and female energy becomes attracted in the material world, but it's fake. It's a big fake out. And I learned that when I was a kid by watching Bugs Bunny. Because Bugs Bunny had a nemesis who was named Elmer Fudd. And Elmer Fudd was always after Bugs he was a rabbit, by the way, Bugs Bunny, I guess that's it. For those of you who are post-Bugs Bunny cartoons. But this rabbit was always being chased by Elmer Fudd, and oftentimes with a shotgun. Seems a little violent for a kid's show. Man with a gun after a rabbit. In any case, one of the ways I noticed as a kid that the rabbit would get away would that he'd go behind a tree and then he'd come back out with eyelashes and lipstick on. And maybe is a little more slender, but immediately Elmer Fudd would become infatuated. And in the cartoon, little hearts would start going around his head. And I was thinking, you fool. It's just same rabbit, new eyelashes and some lips. That's all it is. And that's the same trick everybody falls for in the material world, because the material energy is just being reshaped in various ways. And in fact, Prabhupada notes this, that in every species of life, the male and female become attracted. And because of that, we may notice that even in a very ugly species of life, that they're still attracted. And it's a concocted idea that I'm attracted. This is the source of happiness, so-called happiness, that takes place within the mind. I'm thinking I'm happy, or rather I'm thinking I'm going to be happy at some point, but it never actually occurs. There's no point at which I'm experiencing ananda. So a living entity can go on like this perpetually until there's some interruption and one gets knowledge. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Maya Mugdha Jivernahi Swata Krishna Gyan Jivere Kripaya Koila Krishna Veda Puran. And that is, therefore, the Lord sends help. Of course, in many, many ways, but in this verse, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Srila Vyasadeva specifically came to give knowledge, to interrupt this trance of the living entity upon the material energy, which he's being fooled, and again engaging in sense gratification, which makes him more and more entangled in karma and life after life. He has to do the same kinds of things. So the Bhagavatam is that cutting edge that comes into our consciousness that alerts us to the fact that actually this isn't our body, it's just a temporary manifestation given to us to facilitate our trying to enjoy the material world. And why is that? I mean, why is it offered to us? Or rather, I should say, in an active voice, why does Krishna make this available? To fulfill the desire of the living entity. And this is the root cause that the living entity at some point desires, let me enjoy separately. But look at what Krishna does. 8,400,000 species of life. Could say, why not just 10? You know, you could have a mongoose or a cat and a couple other species, and you go through all 10. And then you say, okay, was that enough? And he was like, you only gave me 10 shots at it. And you get, okay, here's 30,000 bird species. Here's thousands of quadrupeds you can try to enjoy. Be a zebra. We saw zebras in Africa. They're really, kind of proud of themselves. They look around, they go, man, we're zebras. And the living entity in every species of life gets some new form. You watch the birds. I watch them all the time. They're actually up there. They're looking down at us going, you can't do this. I noticed that. They come swooping down and they're like, they dart in and out and they go, we have facility here. They're trying to enjoy. And Krishna gives 8,400,000, that's a lot, 8,400,000 different species so you can have a shot at it. That's how merciful he is in expanding our choices in the material world so we can try it out. And that's what he does. At the same time, he's saying that this is not going to work out. And he comes through the Shastra, he comes through the various sadhus to explain these things, that it won't work. And therefore, out of compassion, Srila Vyasadeva brought the Srimad Bhagavatam. Anarto pasanam sakshat bhakti yogam anhoksajay. Lokasya janato vidvams chakre satvata samhitam. To give people a clarion call, to awaken them to this idea that you're not your body. You won't hear it anywhere else. People aren't talking about this. They're talking about football. In fact, when I was getting off the plane yesterday, we flew in from Washington, D.C. People were watching the playoffs, NFL playoffs, and because they can get Wi-Fi on the airplane. And the big discussion going on while we were waiting to get off the plane. And people were identifying themselves. I'm a such and such fan. I'm a such and such fan. And I was watching the process, and I was thinking, this is the process of the material world. Find some temporary, trivial thing, and identify yourself with it. And it's almost as if the living entity wants to remain in ignorance and looks for excuses to stay distracted. This is one of the dangers of falling in ignorance in the first place. It's hard to get out of that trance. You really need somebody to wake you up and tell you again and again, stop it. This is insanity. You're doing the wrong things. So hearing from Devahuti, hearing the call of somebody who's awakened and who's saying that no more, I give up, it can really move the heart when somebody surrenders like that. That's why we notice at initiation ceremonies, it's one of the most moving teaching events of Krishna consciousness. People always say, oh, maybe I should do this too. Because when somebody actually sits down and makes a vow and says, no more, I give up, I'm actually making a stand now, then other people go like, maybe I should try it too. One of the reasons that one might not do it is what is described by our acharyas as weakness of heart. Daurabhalyam, hridaya daurabhalyam. There's a way in which we get accustomed to this idea that I belong in the material world. And it's really hard to get out of. It was Plato who talked about the cave dwellers, or Aristotle? Plato? Aristotle. Plato, Aristotle, Plato, Aristotle. Huh? What? Plato. It was Plato's caves. And he talked about how the living entities are like people who have lived in caves their whole lives. And they're facing the back wall of the cave, and the only light they get in there is there's some fire burning, and then there's shadowy figures on the wall. And I first read this when I got my first Back to Godhead magazine. Hayagriva Prabhu wrote the article from Plato, the cave dwellers. It seems so appropriate, doesn't it? And then the part that really got me when I read it was that when somebody from outside who came in, who's come in, they saw the sun and they realized, oh, this is something. I mean, when you see the sun, then immediately you know the other part was something insignificant. So let's say one of the cave dwellers gets out and they see the world outside and its infinite greatness, and then they come back in and they try to convince people that, hey, you're in a cave. That's just a shadowy reflection on the wall. Plato said these people may become angry. They may even become violent because you're challenging their way of life. And the living entity gets this kind of attachment that, no, I'm suffering, but this is my suffering. And this is the way I do it. Independent thinking. So what brings up a living entity to this point of saying, I give up, no mas? As, what was his name? No, forget it. The boxer gave up in the 10th round or something. The famous statement, he just threw in the towel. Famous champion boxer. He was getting beat up by Sugar Ray Leonard. And he finally, he was Spanish speaking. He said, no mas, I give up. And that was a big deal. And so when the living entity comes to this point of saying, no mas, I give up, this is the point where it can actually make progress and start to develop his real sense of relationship with the spiritual world. This comes in another famous verse. Akamadinam katina katida palita durnideshas tesham jata mayina karanana trapanupashanti utsrijam sampatam labda buddhis tamayata sharanamabhayam mamnyung shvatmadasye. It's a beautiful prayer in which the living entity says, in how many ways and for how long have I served the bad masters of my senses and the urges of lust, anger, and greed, etc. He said, I've never questioned them. There's never a point at which I've stopped and said, why am I serving them? Nor have they ever reciprocated with me. They never given me time off. And they never really rewarded me with anything. but no more, no mas. Now I'm surrendering to you, Krishna, and I'm turning towards you. I'm asking you for some personal service. So remembering that the real hero in this world is the one who comes to this point of surrendering to Krishna. One can orient oneself towards these kinds of heroes and then develop one's impetus to declare one's dependence on Krishna and pray to Krishna, especially through the holy names. Just as Devahuti is saying here in the first few words, Atame Deva Samoham. Now, my Lord, now I give up. Now I'm surrendering. I don't want this illusion anymore. I don't want it. And that's really all you have to say. You don't have to be so eloquent. You just have to be really sincere about it. You have to have made a decision that this is what I want now. And if you just think it, Krishna knows. But if you say it aloud, you rip a hole in the universe. It becomes a whole new world. If you actually voice that sincerity you feel in your heart where you've realized, I really do quit. I really do give up. And in some commentaries I was reading, Prabhupada was talking about how Krishna knows he's always monitoring the mentality. He's monitoring our sincerity. He's there as the monitor within the heart and watching to see what is our mentality. So we should also monitor our own internal workings and see, how sincere am I about this? That is the fulcrum of power in devotional service. How sincere am I about surrendering to Krishna? And if one can actually find that and do like Pranahari does with those oils and essentialize it, put it in a little bottle, and keep that as one's main strength in life, that the most important aspect of my life, but to speak my practice of devotional service, is my sincere desire to surrender to Krishna. And when one chants, if one can remember that, because there's a lot of other things one can remember when one's chanting, like what? Football. You could think who won, or childhood memories, or you could worry about how you look while you're chanting, or how others are perceived. I mean, there's myriad ways in which the mind can become distracted and go to other subjects. Bahu shaka hyanantascha. It's unlimited where it can go. So this focus on my own sincerity and my own desire to surrender, it's in there somewhere. I know it is because I remember I was there when I said it the first time that I surrender. But then it's easy to forget also, and some other motive can sneak in. That's why the Acharyas warn us: keep coming back to this. Remember that everything in the material world leads to frustration, and that the senses are a network of paths leading to death, and that I really do want to surrender. And if that's the vibration that comes out when I say Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, there's no sleeping in that mood. There's only an ever-awakening feeling of kind of happy surrender, that I found it. I found my sincerity. It was in there somewhere. I had to use some X-ray to find it. It's deep in there. You have to find it and pull it out and isolate it. And thank goodness for these examples that we have throughout the Bhagavatam of the sincere souls, so we can emulate them and make progress in devotional service. There are many other things to say, but let's take some reflections to see if we can find where they are.
I really appreciate this point of I'm suffering, but this is my suffering, of this kind of independent thinking, and then
cave analogy where the person comes and they say, come look at the sun, I want to show you the sun, and then even if they convince the cave dweller, they're like, okay, I'll bring my lamp. And the guy's like, no, you don't need the lamp. The sun is self-illuminating. So in the same way, when we approach Krishna with a speculation rather than just this declaring dependence, right? When I'm like, oh, I'm gonna see the sun by my lamp, by my power, by my ability. And I really like this idea of declaring dependence on Krishna and how empowering that is.
Thank you. Nirakula?
There's a couple of reflections from online.
Yes, please.
First one's Nagar Kirtan.
Nagar Kirtan.
I like how you said we can easily forget our intention to surrender. And then from Shama Mohini, having an internal monitor for sincerity. How sincere am I in service?
Thank you. Those are really helpful reflections. And good to hear from both of them.
And Nagar said he couldn't hear.
Nagar couldn't hear what?
He couldn't hear Ananda Murari.
Oh, he couldn't hear Ananda Murari. Well, that's not good. Ananda Murari Prabhu was talking about the cave dwellers, and he mentioned a detail in the story about how when you asked the cave dweller to come outside and see the sun, he said, I'll bring my lamp. Right? Tushta Prabhu.
Yeah, I was appreciating your point. I was appreciating your point about what are we thinking during our japa. And it seems that there's a reference where Srila Prabhupada said of all the regular principles of chanting of 16 names. So on top of that, it seems that even in our japa sadhana, in order to really find that place of sincerity, we have to find like a sacred space, whether it's early in the morning during Brahma Muhurta, or if one has other work going on, a very concentrated effort and environment. Otherwise, it can be just lip service. At least my experience a lot of times is just getting them in, kind of just gotta get my rounds in, versus when you're in that zone, and even you may be chanting at the Brahma Muhurta time, and it's a very sacred zone, it still takes a lot of effort to make it attentive, chanting of the holy names. And it seems like it's in that zone of attentive chanting that one can start to monitor one's sincerity. Whereas we can go throughout the day doing a lot of activities and appear that we're getting a lot done for Krishna. However, at least for me, what's very revealing is the attentiveness and kind of entering into that attentive space during our japa sadhana that really then propels us to have meaning throughout our other activities.
Yeah, and my thought is that attentiveness follows sincerity. Attentiveness is kind of, it's a last resort. I mean, it should be always present, being attentive, because Krishna says, Manmana bhavamad bhakto. Your mind has to follow this. Nirakula, the light just came on. Just so you know. Your mind has to follow. And of course, it's incumbent upon the practitioner to bring his or her mind into the foreground. My experience is that is vitally important to be attentive, but it's almost like a technique. It's almost Buddhistic, or here's a meditation technique. Follow your breath, keep bringing it back. And Krishna talks about these techniques, these bona fide techniques, in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. But at the end he says that yoginam api sarvesham mad gatanan taratamana shadavan bhajate yomam same yuktatamo mataha. That is, if you have that really powerful experience of your heart's in it, shraddha, like you're really feeling it in your heart, like I'm fallen and I need help, then attentiveness it's not even an issue. It becomes almost ludicrous because you're really needy and calling out. And so if you can find that sincerity and that impetus to surrender and remember that that's what I want to do and keep expressing it again and again through the chanting, then the attentiveness is there automatically. It's not like a technique where I have to, okay, focus my mind now, bring it back to the chanting and things like that. Which again I'm saying is vital and it's completely bona fide. And if all else fails, if you can't find your sincerity, I went with a canteen and a flashlight and I couldn't find it anywhere. So okay, as a second choice, I'll be attentive. And I'll try to watch that I'm being aware that I'm aware that I'm chanting. That's just how I've been looking at it. Yes?
That's what it seems like on the bhakti path.
Keep that really close, otherwise the people online will curse us. What?
The devotees watching online can't hear, so you have
Because your mic is not, your lapel is not picking up the...
I see. There is a high-tech solution.
Yeah.
When that mic gets run through there.
Yeah.
That's what I was appreciating that about on the bhakti path for the Vaishnava sadhaka. It seems that the attentiveness is entering into that mood of Queen Kunti saying Toma Kinchana Gochara, and the purport which the Prabhupada says, when one is materially exhausted, you call out Ego Vinda Krishna. And so it seems like that's where Srila Prabhupada says the chanting is like that of a child crying for the mother. So
Good point.
So it's about the sadhaka, on the bhakti path, that seems to be, as you mentioned, just to do like attentiveness with some kind of external regimented endeavor is ludicrous, but however that attentiveness is of the mood of these acharyas and personalities, enter into have attention of, give attention to how they're practicing their sadhana, as we hear from these acharyas.
Yeah, that's very helpful, thank you. The word attention, has the word ten, which really means to stretch towards something. It also means to hold something together, like tendon, because the word ten is there, it holds the muscle and bone together. And that's our attention is, we're stretching towards something when we really feel it. It's something in our heart we really want. If I want something else when I'm chanting, then my attention's going to those kinds of things at the same time. If I'm a kinchana, I don't want anything. There's nothing I want. I don't want good health. I don't want a guarantee or anything like that. All I want is to surrender. And whatever Krishna you want to do, then okay, that's fine. And akinchana, chanting with that. Then the stretching goes straight towards Krishna. Radhisham, and then back to the online viewers. Shall I repeat what Radhisham says? Okay.
Just a short thought I had.
He has a short thought.
I was just thinking how sometimes there's a way in which somebody may have a desire to surrender.
Sometimes there's a way in which somebody has a desire to surrender,
but
they
may deny themselves by calling themselves lowly or
they may deny themselves by calling themselves lowly, unworthy,
etc.
etc.
And it can be a little black and white. It has to be all or nothing, or I can't.
It can be black and white. It has to be all or nothing.
And at least recently, I've been having an experience of somebody who's been going through that, and maybe there's some advice that.
Oh, okay. So recently, he knows somebody who's been going through that phenomena, and if there's any advice. And it's such a good point. Thank you for bringing that nuance out. It was short but very powerful, your point. The first thing is claiming to be permanently disqualified. That's illegal. Because we're not permanently disqualified. If we were permanently disqualified, then the scriptures have no meaning. This is the logic of Vyasadeva in the Vedanta Sutra. He says, the scriptures are all speaking to the jiva. Therefore, he says, the jiva is an agent for change. and the one who makes the decision to change. Otherwise, there'd be no meaning to the scriptures saying, surrender, improve yourself. So this is something that one must avoid, and that is claiming that I can't improve myself. And the other part is extremely valid, and that is the all or nothing. That's not valid, but the point is the conundrum about being stopped by thinking, unless I have everything, unless I become a pure devotee now, then I can't do anything. But that's not true either. So a couple of examples. One is that Krishna gives this advice to Uddhava in the 11th canto, where he says, Jata Shradu Makkatasu Nirvina Sarvakarmasu Veda Dukatmakam Kamam Sprityage Pyanishvara Tato Bhajetamam Prita Shradalur Dridhanishchaya Jushamanam Statam Kamams Duko Darkams Jagarayan. He says, if you're in this situation where you're sincere, you already know that sense gratification leads to misery. You have disgust for the material world and your involvement with it in the first place. But at the same time, Parityage Pyanishvara, but you don't have the power to control your senses completely yet. He says, Tato Bhajeta Mam Prita, understand that still you're very dear to me because you're practicing the process of devotional service. Shradalur Dridha Nishchaya. You should, with firm faith, you should go on with the process anyway. Jushamanam Shtatam Kamams. Duko Darkams Jagarayan. You should continue the process with faith and have a little repentance, but not so much that you stop the process. And we were studying at Govardhan about 5 years ago, this point about how one should not go too fast in devotional service. Swe swe adhikariya nishta saguna parikirtita viparya dosha syat ubayor eva nishchayaha. That is this is a fixed principle. Two points Krishna makes. One is that you should act according to your adhikari. That is, whatever you can do now, do it. That's a good quality. The Hari says, ubayor, the opposite is true. If you try to do more than you're qualified for and make a pretense of it, then he said that's a fault. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments, he says, also, it's a fault if you have the qualification to do more, but then you don't do it. And then he gives the example of a ladder, and he says, you're climbing a ladder, you put your foot on the rung, and when it's solid, then you move to the next one. And he said, if you run up the ladder too fast, you can slip off. But if you're ready to go to the next rung and then you keep hanging back and you say, oh, I don't want to go to the next rung, it's too dangerous up there, then he said your advancement will be distant. So there's a balance point, and you have to have good guidance, and you also have to know what the surrender process is. It's a process, it's not an event. Of course, there's an event also where you may have this epiphany that, hey, I give up, no mas. But after that, you have to apply yourself to the sixfold process of taking shelter of Krishna, Sharanagati, and step by step, get rid of those things that are holding you back. And even if you do it incrementally, you'll please Krishna, because he notices that you're making an endeavor to move forward. And of course, Prabhupada always said, if you take one step towards Krishna, he'll take 100 towards you, or maybe it's 1,000. And that's how we move in bhakti. We depend on Krishna after we pray to him, like Devahuti's doing here, and expressing our surrender. And the last points are coming online.
We have time, it's 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Well, this is a question from Arindala. Is sincerity the only key for the Lord to eliminate the influence of his external energy and for the Lord to take personal control of his devotee?
Well, sincerity about surrender. Daivahi eshu gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mamevaye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. Krishna says Maya is difficult to overcome, but if you surrender to me, you can easily cross beyond it. You can easily rise above it. So that's our main business, is engaging in the surrendering process. I'll stick my neck out and say yes. Is that it? Yeah or yeah?
And from Nagar,
Hey, it's Nagar.
If short-term gratification and long-term benefit are mutually exclusive, how does one remain satisfied and sane while pursuing the future promise of long-term happiness?
One more time?
In short-term gratification, if short-term gratification and long-term benefit are mutually exclusive, how does one remain satisfied and sane while pursuing the future promise of long-term happiness?
By balance. For instance, if you're austere in your eating, then every once in a while you should have to have a little maha, prasadam. Otherwise you'll go nuts. I've tried it before. Just try eating bean sprouts. Mung bean sprouts every day. It's good for the first 3 days and you feel like a real yogi, but after that it's like, hey. So you have to know how to balance. And Krishna, Prabhupada was perfect at that. He showed how to balance things. He came to America and he saw, these people are way out there. And, he found a balance point. He kept adjusting it. He was like, a little more here, okay, there, balance. And there's a way in which we have to look for that balance in our own life. That's maturity in devotional service. You perform your practice, but you have to have some strategy by good association and by understanding clearly what the Shastras say. Like, don't be a fanatic. Even Krishna tells Uddhava in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, when you're taming a horse, if you're pulling the reins back all the time, horse is going to toss you right off his back. And good luck with training the horse that way. You have to let a little out and say, okay, horsey, you go. Take a little, time in the meadow and then now come back. So you have to have balance and understand that if there's some short-term gratification, it should be in relationship to Krishna, obviously, but keep in mind that the ultimate goal of controlling the senses is to be absorbed in Krishna. It's not about restraining the senses, it's about how we can become more absorbed in Krishna consciousness. So if you're restraining your senses to the point where you forget Krishna and you're sleeping all day long with, out of deprivation, and all day long when you're chanting, you're thinking, hungry, 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 instead of Hare Krishna and surrender, then you need to adjust the dial a little bit more. And that is, right, Nirkula, the last word for today. We thank everyone for coming. Oh, it's so nice here. I forgot to tell you this. It's so nice here because this is an oasis for Krishna consciousness, right in the middle of the mountains here. And the effect is very powerful. You may think that you have a little family here of devotees, but actually the kind of practice that you're doing here has a residual effect all over the world. People notice it amazingly. When there's a dedication to the practice of Krishna consciousness, going to Mangalartik, chanting your rounds, working together, practicing austerities, and distributing Krishna consciousness, maintaining a community, staying together on things, learning how to communicate with one another, even though it's really hard to be personal and to open up one's heart and tell what's really going on. All these kinds of things that you do day after day where you think, boy, this is a hard slog just to keep a little thing going on. No, it's not a little thing, it's huge. And the rest of the world may look like it's doing a lot of stuff, but minus what you're doing here, the concentration that you're giving to your rounds, the way that you're learning how to overcome problems through communication and coming together, and the individual struggles that you're taking to right yourself when you feel yourself going off course, these are the most powerful elements in the whole universe. And right here in this little laboratory, you're all using, don't look now, your human life properly to go back home, back to Godhead. And it's extremely eventful. We just came here to tell you that. Because sometimes you forget when you're in the middle of it. Like you have a painting and you know, somebody comes to your house and goes, where'd you get that? And you go like, oh, that thing? You forget. Gaur Premanande Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Bo. Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Bo. Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Just a tip, you have to stop right at the end. And when you do, it's amazing the effect. When everyone stops at one time, it's a good sound effect. Try it again, Ananda.
Yeah.
Gaur Premanande.
Haribo!
Nitai Gaura Haribo. Bo. 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Bo. Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. See? Vanchakalptaruscha kripasnabhevacha patitanam.
Marman, Natari Marman, Natari Marman, Natari Marman, hey, Natari Marman, Natari Marman, Natari Marman, Natari Marman.